Sí, la verdad que sí, que siempre empecé a jugar contra las selecciones grandes, no me pasó nunca contra Inglaterra en la primera vez, así que
Right now, somewhere in Atlanta, a man is getting ready to do something he has never done in his entire career. Lionel Messi has played over 100 matches for Argentina. He has scored against Brazil, he has scored against Germany, against France, against Spain, the Netherlands, Italy. Every football power on the planet has, at some point, had to find a way to deal with him, except one. For 20 years, there has been a name missing from that list. A team Messi has simply never faced. Not once. Not in a friendly, not in a qualifier, not on the biggest stage the sport has to offer. Tonight, that changes. And 3 days before it did, the man responsible for stopping him went completely silent. No statement, no press conference, nothing. While reporters from every major outlet in the country circled the same question over and over, England's manager said absolutely nothing at all. Until he did. And what came out of his mouth in that room wasn't caution. It wasn't the safe, rehearsed line every coach reaches for before the biggest match of his life. It was something else entirely. A single sentence that within hours was being replayed, argued about, and picked apart across two continents. Some are calling it the most honest thing an England manager has said before a World Cup semifinal in years. Others are calling it a mistake that Argentina's dressing room is going to make him regret. Stick with this video, because by the end of it, you're going to understand exactly why one sentence from a press conference has an entire footballing nation holding its breath, and why what happens in the next few hours might be remembered for decades. Let's start with the number, because it's the whole reason this story exists in the first place. 0. That's how many times Lionel Messi has faced England across his entire career. Not 0 goals, 0 appearances. He has never even stepped onto a pitch against them. If you're watching this from the US, the UK, or Canada, and that sounds hard to believe given how long he's been playing at the top level, you're not wrong to be surprised. It genuinely is one of the strangest gaps in modern football. Think about how long Messi has been doing this. He debuted for Argentina's senior team back in 2005. Since then, he has become the most decorated player in the history of the sport, a World Cup winner, an 8-time Ballon d'Or recipient, and by a wide consensus, the greatest to ever play the game. In that time, he has gone up against every serious footballing nation on earth. Every one, except England. And that gap is exactly why this fixture landed so differently the moment the World Cup bracket was set. Because England and Argentina already have one of the most loaded rivalries in football history, this isn't two random federations meeting for a spot in the final. This goes back decades, and if you're less familiar with the history, here's the short version. 1986. The quarterfinal that's still debated in pubs on both sides of the Atlantic to this day. In the same match, Diego Maradona scored two of the most talked about goals in World Cup history. One with his hand, which the officials missed, and one that's still shown in highlight reels as maybe the greatest individual goal ever scored. Argentina won. England never really got over it. 1998. A round of 16 match that ended in a penalty shootout after a sending off swung the entire game. Argentina went through again. 2002. England finally got a measure of revenge, edging Argentina 1-0 in the group stage in Japan, on a penalty that still gets replayed every time these two sides meet. 14 meetings between these two countries, stretching all the way back to 1951. That's the rivalry. That's the weight already sitting inside this fixture before Messi ever enters the conversation. And now, for the very first time, the best player either country has ever seen from the Argentine side is walking directly into the middle of it, on the biggest possible night, a World Cup semifinal, with a place in the final on the line. If you've been following this tournament from the US, the UK, or Canada, you've probably already noticed something about the way Messi has played through this knockout stage. He hasn't just been present in Argentina's biggest matches. He's been the difference in almost all of them. Every time Argentina has needed a moment of magic to break a stubborn defense, he's produced it. That's exactly what makes this fixture so dangerous for England. This isn't a 38-year-old riding reputation into a semi-final. This is a player still operating at the level that made him the best in the world in the first place, arriving at the one match against the one opponent he has never had to solve before. That's the context England's manager was sitting with for 3 straight days of silence. Every reporter covering the tournament had built their entire pre-match coverage around one question. How do you prepare for a player you've genuinely never had to prepare for before? There's no last time we played him file to pull from, no previous encounter to study, nothing. And for 3 days, the manager gave them nothing back either. Then, less than 48 hours before kickoff, he sat down in front of the cameras, and instead of opening with the usual diplomatic non-answer, he said the one thing nobody expected him to say first. He's never played us, he reportedly told the room. 20 years of being the best player in the world, and somehow, this fixture just never happened. I think that's remarkable. And I also think it means something important. Nothing walks out onto that pitch with him tonight except what he actually does in the next 90 minutes. No ghosts, no history repeating itself. Just a game for the first time between two teams that have never had to figure each other out. That single answer reframed the entire narrative. Most nations carrying a rivalry this heavy would be leaning on painful memories for motivation or bracing for the past to repeat itself. England, when it comes to Messi specifically, has neither. There's no scar tissue, no specific nightmare to relive, which, according to the manager, removes an excuse a lot of England teams have quietly hidden behind before. You can't be haunted by something that's never actually happened to you, he continued. So if anyone in that dressing room is afraid of him tonight, that fear isn't coming from experience, it's coming purely from reputation. And reputation isn't going to mark him for us. Our discipline is. That line, reputation isn't going to mark him for us, was the one that started circulating before the press conference had even wrapped. Because it wasn't just a soundbite, it was a direct challenge aimed squarely at his own players, days before the single biggest match most of them will ever be part of. Now here's why the stakes on both sides of this match are as high as they've ever been. Argentina arrive in Atlanta as the reigning world champions, still riding the high of their triumph in Qatar. This is not a team stumbling into the Final Four. They have been ruthless throughout the knockout rounds, grinding down Cape Verde before putting 3 goals past Switzerland in the quarterfinal to book their place in this semifinal. And running through almost everything they've done offensively is the same 38-year-old who has been unpicking defenses at the highest level since before some of England's current squad were even teenagers. England, meanwhile, arrive off the back of one of the most dramatic wins of the tournament, an extra-time quarterfinal against Norway, settled by a Jude Bellingham brace in a match that genuinely could have gone either way in the final 10 minutes. For England, this semi-final represents a chance at something the country hasn't touched since 1966. 60 years of near misses, 60 years of penalty shootouts, injury time collapses, and heartbreak precisely in moments like this one. Another semi-final, another shot at ending 6 decades of hurt. And standing directly in the way is a name that needs no introduction anywhere in the football world. So naturally, reporters pushed the manager further. How, tactically, do you actually deal with a player who has been directly involved in a goal in every single knockout match Argentina has played this tournament? His answer was short, and notably, it wasn't about isolating one man for the job. You don't stop him with a single player, he said. That's the trap teams have fallen into for years. Put one defender on an island chasing him for 90 minutes, and you end up hunting a ghost while the rest of Argentina's attack does whatever it wants around you. That's not how we're approaching this. Everybody stays switched on, every single phase of the game. The moment one of us relaxes for even a few seconds, that's the opening he's waiting for. And we've all watched what that costs teams this tournament. We're not going to be the next example of it. Notice what he didn't do there. He didn't pretend Messi is anything less than a genuine, once-in-a-generation threat. There was no false bravado, no, he's just another player line that would have rung completely hollow given what the man has done to nearly every serious opponent on the planet. I'll say it as plainly as I can, he is the best there has ever been, the manager added. Nobody in this camp is walking in there believing otherwise. But being the best doesn't make a match unwinnable. It makes it harder. There's a real difference between those two things, and I need every player out there tonight to understand that difference in their bones before the whistle even goes. That distinction, respect without fear, became the backbone of the entire press conference. And by his own admission, it's a distinction England, as a footballing nation, hasn't always gotten right on the biggest nights. We've walked into massive matches before already flinching, he admitted, already believing somewhere in the back of our minds how the story usually ends for us. I am not interested in that version of this team showing up tonight, not with a place in a World Cup final sitting right there in front of us. For a country that has spent decades quietly bracing for disappointment in exactly these kinds of moments, that's about as direct as an England manager gets in a public setting. It wasn't a shot at Argentina. It was, in effect, a shot at his own footballing culture's long history of losing the mental battle before a ball is even kicked. Unsurprisingly, the reaction split almost immediately. Clips were cut, captioned, and dissected across every platform within minutes of the press conference ending. Some pundits praised it as exactly the kind of honesty English football has needed for years. A manager finally naming the pressure out loud instead of pretending it doesn't exist, and daring his own players to rise above it rather than quietly hoping they might. Former England internationals speaking on broadcast panels called it a refreshing change from the usual guarded, say-nothing routine that's become standard before matches of this magnitude. Others weren't convinced. The concern, raised by more than one former player in the hours that followed, is simple. You don't need to hand Argentina's dressing room any extra motivation heading into a World Cup semifinal, especially not against a team fronted by a player who has spent 2 decades turning exactly this kind of doubt into fuel. Because here's the thing about Messi that history keeps confirming. He has heard versions of, "We're not afraid of you" before. From Brazil, from Germany, from nearly every serious opponent Argentina has faced across 2 decades of tournaments. And more often than not, his response has been to go out and remind everyone, as efficiently as possible, exactly why the reputation exists to begin with. None of that requires any shared history with a specific opponent. It's simply what he does, night after night, regardless of who happens to be standing across from him. Whether that pattern repeats itself tonight in Atlanta, nobody can say for certain. What is certain is that England's manager, for whatever reason, decided this was the moment to stop hiding from the size of the occasion, and instead put it directly in front of his own players and the entire country hours before kickoff. If saying this out loud fires them up, then so be it, he said, addressing the criticism head-on. I would rather my players walk out there believing something than walk out there with fear dressed up as respect. That is the trade I am willing to make, with a place in a World Cup final on the line. Not reckless, by his own account. A calculated decision, made with the single biggest stage of his managerial career sitting directly in front of him. And then came the line that ended up leading nearly every back page and every sports broadcast by the following morning. "This is the first time he has ever faced us," the manager said, closing out the press conference. 20 years, and tonight is finally the night. I would rather my players walk into that as the ones making history than as the ones simply watching it happen in front of them. Pressed one final time on what success actually looks like heading into a match this heavy, he didn't retreat into the usual coach speak either. Success looks like 90 minutes, or 120 if it comes to that, where nobody in an England shirt is playing scared of a name, he said. Whatever the scoreline says at the final whistle, that is the version of this team I want the country watching at home to see on the biggest stage the sport has. Not a guarantee of victory, a standard, a line drawn by a manager who knows exactly how many times England has arrived at nights precisely like this one, and lost the moment before the match had even properly started. And it's worth zooming out for a second here, especially if you're watching this from outside England. This match isn't just important to one country's football history, it's shaping up to be one of the most watched semifinals this tournament has produced anywhere in the world. American audiences have spent this entire World Cup watching the sport grow in a way it never quite has before on home soil. And a match like this, the greatest player alive, a rivalry with 60 years of baggage behind it, and a genuine first-time meeting on the line, is exactly the kind of storyline that turns casual viewers into people who are suddenly invested in a result. Whatever happens tonight in Atlanta, it's going to be talked about well beyond just England and Argentina. So here's where that actually leaves things, with kickoff only hours away. 20 years of Lionel Messi playing football at the very highest level, and tonight, in a World Cup semifinal with a place in the final on the line, Somebody wearing an England shirt is finally going to find out exactly what it's like to stand across from him when the stakes are at their absolute highest. Not in a friendly nobody remembers, not in a dead group stage match. In the one game neither side can afford to lose. If England hold that 0 for 90 more minutes, it becomes one of the most remarkable defensive stories of this entire tournament. A record that survived the greatest player of a generation on the single biggest night of his career. If Messi finally breaks it, it happens on the largest stage this rivalry has ever handed him, in the one match people will still be talking about 20 years from now. Either way, by full time in Atlanta, that number stops being a strange piece of football trivia. It becomes history, one way or the other. So here's the question heading into tonight. Do you think England's manager just said exactly what his team needed to hear before the biggest match of their lives? Or do you think he just handed Lionel Messi and Argentina's dressing room all the motivation they needed? Drop your prediction in the comments before kickoff. Scoreline, first goal, all of it. Let's see how many of you actually called it right. If this breakdown got you ready for tonight's match, hit like before you go, subscribe for the full reaction the second that final whistle blows, and turn on notifications, because whichever way this goes, football history gets rewritten in the next few hours.